Hello, everybody. Welcome to Voice for Victims. My name is Jeff Herman. This is going to be a weekly webcast where we're talking about issues relating to sexual abuse and sexual assault. This is an issue that has been plaguing our country and the world for a long time, and we're going to be talking about some of the key issues that will hopefully shed a light on the darkness and allow people to get a better understanding what the issue is and also how we can solve some of these problems. From my perspective, I think the problem is worse today than ever, and that's because primarily the internet. And we're going to talk about that today, but today's focus of the show is going to be about sexual assault on campuses around the country. This has become a problem. It's been around for a long time, but finally the federal government has been taking action through some legislation and some laws that have been in place but really never been enforced properly, namely a law called Title IX. And we're going to be talking about that. I'm also going to have some guests today. Laura Dunn is going to be one of our guests later on today. She's heads up an organization that deals with sexual assaults on campuses, and we'll get a chance to meet Laura. And also we're going to spotlight an organization that also deals with helping victims of sexual assault. So the way the show is going to work is we're going to talk about generally the issue and the news that's related to it, and then we're going to go right to our guest. So first, let me just talk about what the issue is. And the issue is that girls and boys, but primarily girls, are being sexually assaulted on campuses. And the universities are required to protect these students, and unfortunately, what we know is that even with the laws that are in place, that the universities are not either doing enough, they're looking the other way, or in some cases, they're actually shaming the victims or discouraging the victims from actually coming forward and getting help. So first, let's talk about what Title IX is. So Title IX is a law that was enacted in 1972. It's a federal law, and basically what it says is that universities must not discriminate based on gender. It also applies to any schools that are receiving public funds, like high schools, elementary schools, any public schools. We're talking about universities primarily today, universities and colleges. So through this law called Title IX, which has been enacted, I said, since the 1970s, it's been developed so that schools are required to protect students from sexual assault. That's considered sexual discrimination. And so students are entitled to an education free from sexual assault. Now, what's happened is that part of Title IX requires universities to not only prevent these things, but when there is notice of a sexual assault, to provide a hearing to the victims, to take action, to investigate. Regardless of what the police authorities might be doing, the universities are required to do their own investigations to ensure that the campuses are safe. Now, the universities and the campuses around this country have not been doing that properly. So finally, the U.S. government created a task force, and they just issued a report called Not Alone. And in this report, which was issued on April of just this year, 2014, the government outlined the problem and started talking about solutions. And in the task force, there's been some very important people, victims, survivors, people in this area have been contributing to this task force. And so we're going to be able to get into that and talk about things that are being done. Now, after this report came out, fortunately, students have taken notice. And what we're seeing now, the students are actually protesting around the country at campuses and demanding that, number one, students be protected and that universities take action to follow Title IX. In fact, just this week at graduation at Harvard University, students who are graduating, many of them put a crimson tag or tape on their caps to show solidarity and support, because at Harvard University, the students are alleging that the university has been not acting in accordance with Title IX and in fact discouraging victims from proceeding under Title IX and seeking disciplinary action against their perpetrators. And obviously, that's a big problem. We know that one of the best ways to protect people in the future, victims, is to expose predators and institutions that protect them. And so we have this report that has been initiated, and we have students protesting. And now I'm just going to show a clip of a Madeline Smith, who was part of the task force when they introduced this report that came out. So we'll take a look at that clip now, and then we're gonna go to our guest.
It's been just over 2 years since I was sexually assaulted at Harvard. And I would want to share what it's like when your dad answers the phone and you have to find a way to tell him that the one thing he never wanted to happen to his little girl had happened. Or what it's like sitting in a room of Harvard professors as they look at a magnified photo of your backside covered in bruises and broken blood vessels. Because those are the personal moments that no one ever talks about. In my 8-month experience with Harvard's policies, I interacted with a lot of people. Some were the definite good guys, those people at Harvard's Office of Sexual Assault Prevention and Response, and those at Boston's Victim Rights Law Center. Then there were the definite bad guys, my attacker and the faculty that gamed the system in order to support him. But then there were a lot of people who fell somewhere in between. These are the people, most of them administrators, who, despite having the best intentions, were paralyzed by the institution's archaic and misinformed policies. It's for those people, the ones in between, and the thousands and thousands of students with stories like mine, for whom the hard work of this task force will be the most meaningful.
Okay, hope you could hear that. It was a little low on my end, but I hope that everybody heard that. So that was Madeline Smith. She's a survivor of sexual assault herself at Harvard University, and she was introducing Joe Biden, who actually heads up the task force, the White House task force on this issue. It's an important first step, but it is just a first step. There's a lot of work to do in order to protect students on campuses, and we're going to talk about that today. So let me go ahead and welcome our first guest, Laura Dunn. And Laura, who is appearing via Skype with us today, she's a survivor herself and has become an advocate. She's the founder of an organization called Serve Justice, which decreases the prevalence of sexual violence by assisting survivors, empowering activists, and supporting institutions who are trying to do the right thing. So, Laura, welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
Sure, I'm glad you could be here. So, Laura, let's get right to it. How do you see the issue today?
Well, the issue of campus sexual assault is obviously gaining more attention than it ever has before. There are more and more survivors that are coming. You mentioned protests, but there's also a lot of victims who are using their full name, their faces, and being very public about what happened to them, just like Madeline. And because of that, people are starting to realize this is a prevalent issue. This isn't just a statistic that no one thinks about. These are names and faces and real lives that are being affected. So I think the issue has more attention, and I think colleges are finally under pressure to do the right thing.
Okay, and we'll be happy to take questions today. If anybody has any questions that they want to send in, they can send them via Twitter, and that would be at Jeff Herman. Just tweet us your questions right now, or you can email the questions to me at jherman@hermanlaw.com, and we'll be happy to try to answer those questions for you, anybody out there who has questions. And so, same thing, if you're watching this on a replay, and you have questions or concerns or anything you want to say, feel free to even contact me via Twitter or via email after the show has aired, and we'll try to address those questions. And so Laura, so now there is this student activity, and there's the institutions looking to do the right thing. So what are the numbers that we're hearing about the number of women being sexually assaulted or students on campuses?
Well, back in 2000, there was a really big study called the Sexual Victimization of College Women, and they found then that it was about 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 women in college that are being sexually assaulted. We've done a significant amount of research since then, and we're finding that a lot of victimization either happens in high school right before college, and a lot of those individuals are abused again once in college. But the numbers pretty much hold the same. It's 1 in 4 to 1 in 5, and of those, the vast majority are alcohol-facilitated sexual assault. So often in drinking circumstances, and for whatever reason, our criminal justice system and even campuses have done a very poor job of addressing that specific type of violence, even though it's the most common, and that there's even research on predators using alcohol as a tool and creating repeat offenses. The average, I believe, is 6 victims per perpetrator on campus that uses alcohol.
Right. And so, we all know these stories, unfortunately, where there's a lot of alcohol on campuses. And a lot of times now there's the prevalence of drugs being put into alcohol as well to assist in these rapes. And one of the problems is that many victims don't even identify themselves as victims because, as we know, about 90% of assaults that take place are from somebody the person knows. And so a lot of times victims feel that, well, I was there, I was compliant, meaning that they were physically participating, but they were inebriated, so they aren't unable to consent. And I think it's important to point out that when a person is intoxicated, they are not capable of consent, and then that it is a rape. There has to be a verbal consent, and when a person's intoxicated, the message has to be, there is no consent.
Absolutely, and I would just be cautious. It's not that they're physically participating, it's that things are being done to them. Oftentimes these victims, I being one of them, am not fully conscious and not actually engaged or active. And in fact, it's someone else that's taking advantage of that circumstance or just overcoming our will or doing it when we're not conscious at all. So I think people have this understanding that it's just miscommunication, it's a misunderstanding, it's a little unclear because alcohol's involved. But actually, there's many survivors such as myself who've told their story, and it's actually quite heinous. There is significant violence, and it's very unfortunate that our laws aren't protecting victims in those circumstances.
So, Laura, could you share a little bit of your experience with us in terms of how you got into this issue and sort of what happened?
Absolutely. So as a freshman at the University of Wisconsin, when two men on my crew team offered to walk me from one party to another, it was basically my second time drinking. I was very small. I was a coxswain. And these two men were walking me, and they led me the wrong direction. And right away I said something, and they were like, oh, his apartment's really close. We're just going to swing by. And what they actually did is dragged me into the apartment and took turns sexually assaulting me. And I was in and out of consciousness, and even at one point I came to, begged for it to stop, and it continued after that even. So this issue made me very passionate about sexual violence because I was like many survivors. I didn't identify it right away as a crime. I blamed myself. But I was informed about alcohol-facilitated sexual violence, acquaintance rape being the norm, and I realized that what happened to me actually is a crime. It's not my fault, just because I knew who the people were. And so I went on a path eventually of reporting to the campus, reporting to police, and ultimately not seeing justice through either process and having to file a Title IX complaint against my school for delaying an investigation and really allowing these men not only to have assaulted me without consequence, but even to retaliate and threaten me again on campus.
Right, and that's unfortunately a big problem that we see, in that which keeps victims from coming forward, is that many times victims come forward and they're attacked and they're shamed, and so it's a very difficult thing. And so I commend you for your bravery, for taking a stand and taking a really horrible event in your life. And I understand you went to law school now and you just graduated. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And so you formed this organization called Serve Justice. So tell us about that.
So Serve Justice has been an idea I've had for a while, and because of all the advocacy I've done, both through sharing my story and ultimately advising the White House Task Force, helping pass the Campus Save Act, which was through the Violence Against Women Act that passed last year, I've been able to kind of build a platform so that survivors know that they can come to me and find assistance, whether that's filing a Title IX complaint against the university, filing a Clery Act complaint. I often refer survivors who need attorneys to those who can assist them, specifically victims' rights attorneys that work with them pro bono and contingency fee rather than charging them. And I've also supported institutions. We have right now the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community is looking at sexual violence and looking for crisis response or a code of ethics to implement because it's becoming such a problem. So we assist anyone who needs the help and expertise on sexual violence, and that includes activists. A lot of these people that are organizing on campus reach out, we give them media connections, we help them form their campaigns, and if they want to actually change the policy at their school, we give them recommendations for what that new policy should look like.
Okay, so let's talk specifically now what young women can do, or men in that matter, if they find themselves in an unfortunate situation being sexually assaulted on campus. So what are the students' rights, and what should they be doing?
Yeah, well, absolutely. If ideally, survivors will go right away and get a medical examination or a rape kit. That's very essential. People want criminal justice, especially. But in addition to that, they have the right to report to the police or not to report to the police. And that's true even in the campus process. The benefit of going through the campus is you obviously make your educational environment safe. The school has an obligation to investigate and to do a disciplinary hearing if there's enough to support your claim. So survivors can go through that process. It should be prompt and equitable. It should take less than 60 days. And if it doesn't, that's grounds for filing a Title IX complaint. And additionally, survivors can go through that criminal process. I really encourage anyone who does that to have a victim advocate. It's a very tough process, and it doesn't always feel as if people are on your side. So having someone support you through that process is important. But specifically for the campus proceeding, you have equal rights to the accused. That means you can have the same amount of witnesses. That means if they are allowed to have an attorney, you're allowed to have an attorney. And it means at the end of the day, when there's a final result, you're actually entitled to that in writing at the same time as the accused, and has to provide both a reason for the finding and, if there's a sanction, a reason for that sanction. And if there's an appeal process, both parties get that right as well. So it's really about equity, making sure that no side is favored in this. But the goal of campuses are to find out, is there misconduct here? And if so, to remedy that and ideally sanction through expulsion or at least a suspension that lasts the duration of the victim's education.
Right, and so so first the student victim has the right to follow Title IX to ensure that to enforce Title IX to make sure that they're getting a fair hearing, and basically that's about really seeking sort of administrative remedy against the perpetrator on campus. Secondly, it's a crime. It should be reported to the police authorities. Now, this is where I always tell my clients, you have to just understand that sometimes it's a very frustrating process because these cases typically are the classic he said, she said. And so in our criminal system of justice, the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. Oftentimes, because of that, these cases are not criminally prosecuted. I think it's important, though, for victims to report it because it validates for them that a crime was committed against them. Just understanding that they don't control that process. In fact, victims are not even parties in a criminal case, they're witnesses. And then the third thing is civil claims, which is a lot what I do, which is where victims have the right to bring their own civil claim against the perpetrator and against potentially the institution. And this is where Title IX also comes in as a hammer. Because under Title IX, now students who've been sexually assaulted and where someone at the campus knew that this perpetrator was unsafe and there were allegations of sexual harassment by the perpetrator before, and the school doesn't make it safe, then these students have the right to their own Title IX claim for civil claims against the institution. And then potentially there's negligence claims. But students, I think it's important to avail themselves of all their rights and to hold the institutions accountable, whether it's through Title IX administrative procedures or a civil claim. One of the things we know, and maybe you can talk about this, Laura, is from my experience in representing victims of abuse, is that victims often feel like this power of control is taken from them. And that when by keeping silent and not having a voice, things get worse and the healing hasn't begun. And by being able to take action and stand up for themselves like you've done and speaking out and holding, attempting to hold the perps accountable, the institutions accountable, and protecting other women in the future, it's an important part of the healing process.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest reasons that victims come forward and actually do report, sometimes it's not just about what happened to them, it's about the fact that they don't want this to ever happen in the future to anyone else. So knowing that you're not just fighting for yourself through that process, you're actually fighting to make campuses safer, you're fighting to take abusers off the street. I think that really is empowering to survivors. And what's really important, the Violence Against Women Act that just passed last year had the Campus Save Act, and it gave survivors the same rights as the accused to have an advisor of their choice, which means you can have an attorney in that process. So you can have an advocate there, you can advocate for yourself, but you can enforce your rights like never before. And I think really, as you mentioned, it's very empowering to actually look at this process as an opportunity to assert your rights, to get what you deserve, which is justice. And through that process, there can actually be healing ultimately. It's a struggle, it's a fight. But having an amazing victims' rights attorney such as yourself by their side makes it that much easier.
Right. And I hear from a lot of women who've started to go through the process. They've done everything they're supposed to do on campus. They've contacted the Title IX representatives, made a complaint, And then they start going through the process and they feel re-victimized again. Because one of the things is that these institutions, universities, do not have a standard format that they're required to follow to even investigate the cases. And so one of the things, and I know you've been involved in this issue, is that from the government's perspective, they're trying to create these sort of standards. And in fact, the Clery Act, maybe we can talk about that. It's another law that has a little bite to it. I don't think enough yet. I mean, one of the things, and we could talk about this, is that if there's a Clery Act violation, there's a claim for a fine of $35,000. And so let's just generally talk about the Clery Act, if you could.
Sure. So the Clery Act, now that it's been amended, does three main things. One, it's requiring crimes to be reported on campus, and not just sexual violence, also stalking, dating violence, domestic violence. The other big thing that it's done is required education, both for incoming students, ongoing throughout the year. That helps create awareness for people to identify when violence is occurring and how to avoid it, but also training for administrators who are enforcing these procedures. That's never been required before. It's going into effect this fall. And finally, the most important thing is those rights that I mentioned for survivors, the written decision, the equal rights to witnesses, to have an advisor. A lot of those victims' rights come from the Clery Act. So you're very right that the sanction behind it is, $35,000, but that's per violation. And oftentimes they're seeing multiple violations. So unfortunately, that doesn't make the victim whole, but it does give a cost to the institution.
Okay, Laura, thank you so much for your time. If there are victims out there who want to get in touch with you at Serve Justice, how would they do that?
So Serve Justice, survjustice.org is our website. We have an intake form. That's the best way to do it. And over time, we just have a DC office that we got this week. There will be more ways to contact us in months to come.
Great. So thank you so much. Congratulations on passing law school and all your hard work, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on again.
Thank you. Okay, so that was Laura Dunn. She's a great example of somebody who's taken, a really horrific thing that happened to her, and was so brave to not only come forward, but to create her own organization. She went to law school, and she's really dedicated herself now to helping other victims. And so that's what we love to see. So now I'm going to bring in our next guest, and let me see. Hold on.
Okay, I'm going to hang up with you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm bringing in. Give me a moment here. Oh, let me. Here we go. So we're bringing in, if I can do this correctly. Here we go. We still have Tracy Vickers. You there, Tracy?
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing great.
Okay, so let me introduce Tracy because we want to spotlight her organization. Tracy, it's Vickers, is with SAFER, which is a Students Active for Ending Rape. It's an organization dedicated to empowering students to hold their universities accountable for having strong campus sexual assault policies and programming. So, welcome, Tracy.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Tell us about your organization.
Yeah, so SAFER was founded in 2000 at Columbia University by undergraduate students at the college. They were very frustrated with their university's reaction to allegations of sexual assault, and they realized that the college actually had some pretty big gaps and faults within its current sexual assault policy. So they led a reform campaign to strengthen the college's sexual assault policy and intervention practices. A few years later, the organization reorganized as a national nonprofit organization to support student activists in reforming their college's sexual assault policies across the country. And so we currently work on a national basis, and we provide training and mentorship programs to student activists looking to advocate for policy reform campaigns on their campus, empowering them to work with administrators to identify gaps and holes in their college's sexual assault policy to make it stronger, and to create a better system for supporting survivors and preventing assault. We also do research. In the last 18 months, we've produced 2 major research documents. One was called Beyond Blue Lights and Buddy Systems, and it was a study conducted on the actions of anti-rape student activists and what activities they were participating in on their college campus. And then the second was the Campus Accountability Project, which we partnered with VDAY to conduct. And we looked at 299 campus sexual assault policies and graded them against a variety of factors such as best practices, federal law compliance, and things like that.
Thank you, Trace. So one question that was sent in to me here, I think I'd like to engage you in this, is the question is, what can students involved in Greek life do to discourage sexual assault on campus?
That's a great question. One of the challenges that we've seen with Greek life is that when you're in that environment, there's a lot of peer pressure to act a specific way. And typically, younger members of a fraternity or sorority will act in accordance with what they see their older peers and either fraternity brothers or sorority sisters acting like and in activities that they're engaging in. If fraternities and sororities say sexual assault is not going to be accepted in our fraternity or in our sorority, we will not allow our members to perpetuate sexual assault, and we will intervene if we see a potential sexual assault happening, and they make that clear to all members of the sorority or the fraternity, that will trickle down, and that peer pressure will work to help reduce sexual assault within those systems.
Yeah, it seems to me that Greek life is a great place to really hone in on and put some effort in. I mean, I believe that from the national offices of these fraternities, that there should be mandatory education taking place every year on campuses at every Greek house, and a zero tolerance policy. And someone from the national offices going to these parties and enforcing and making sure what's going on with the alcohol, making sure that the Greek members are aware of their responsibilities, because unfortunately, you know, especially, and this is what last issue I want to mention, is with the internet now and social media, not only is there peer pressure, but it's like everyone wants to one-up the other person. Mm-hmm. And you actually see now with these websites where inappropriate photographs are taken of girls being assaulted, they're being posted on the internet, and it's become, the internet makes everything bigger. And so the problems that are out there become even more exaggerated. And so how do we address the responsibility of in the way that social media is interfering with women's rights?
Social media can be a powerful tool for change. It can also be a powerful tool for preventing change. As you mentioned, there have been videos and images of women being assaulted circulated across the country, whether it's from Steubenville and the incident that happened there to incidents that are happening on college campuses across the nation. Social media, though, has also really benefited a lot of the activists that are active in SAFER, active in NRAPE on campus, or Know Your 9, who are 2 of the other large student activist organizations focused on preventing assault, because it allows them to network. It allows survivors from schools from all across the country to connect and share their stories and create some kind of unified action through social media and through the internet and through email, which is really great. But again, when you have this issue of privacy and you have this issue of these images going out there into the media, it also begs the question of why do individuals think that it's okay to, one, treat women this way, to assault women, and then publicly display those assaults? I think that that's a bigger conversation, not just about social media, but the way that social media interacts with rape culture, and the fact that today, if we're not teaching young men or even young women that they need to respect each other, they need to respect each other's boundaries. If someone tells you no, then you need to listen to them. Women are not objects for your sexual consumption. Women are human beings that have basic human rights, and they have their right to bodily integrity. And if we're not educating men on that, they're not going to understand that what they're doing is wrong. We've heard this conversation time and time again where young men are engaging in activity, they are taking pictures or images, or they are having conversations even, and they don't necessarily understand that what they're doing is wrong because they haven't been educated that, you know, what they're doing is assault. And so I think that begs the question of why aren't we upping our prevention and education efforts? Why aren't we starting sexual assault prevention education at younger and younger ages? By the time most students get to college, they may have already engaged in sexual activity, they may already have preformed ideas about what sex looks like and what constitutes an act of sexual assault. And so they may not even know that what they're doing is assault. And colleges can reinforce what is and isn't allowed, what is assault, what isn't assault, the importance of consent and things like that. But this is a conversation we need to be having across the country. Parents need to be having conversations about consent and sexual assault with their children before they go to college. Schools can reinforce the message, but many students learn these ideas before they even get to their university, and then suddenly they're in this environment where they're free from their parents. They have access to alcohol and drugs, and they suddenly have this sense of freedom that they've never had before, and they're more likely to engage in different types of social actions based off of social pressure or a want to fit in because of that.
Thank you, Tracy. So that was Tracy Vichers from SAFER, S-A-F-E-R organization. And I want to wrap up with a point that Tracy makes, which is key, which is education. And starting at a very young age. If you think about it, we have fire drills in our schools throughout the year. Every child in elementary school knows where to go if there's a fire. Well, that's great. Fires aren't the big problem that we're facing. When 25% of the kids in schools of our population are being sexually abused, how is it that we're not having mandated education about preventing sexual abuse? We don't want to do away with fire drills, but let's include other problems, notably preventing sexual abuse, and educate our kids. Let's start there, and it will trickle up, and that's what we want. And so I want to thank my guests, and thank you all for joining us. This is Voice for Victims. My name is Jeff Herman. We will be doing this show weekly, and look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you.